What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another live stream. We're going to kick off, as always intended, with a bit of an essay review. I've got an introduction here. Someone's written an essay on the Merchant of Venice. So I'm going to break down the introduction based on the question provided. And hopefully I'm going to show you a few ways that you could improve an essay like this, especially for an introduction. Introductions being the most important part of an essay. Typically, especially because it's the first thing that the marker reads. So we'll go through that, break that down, see if there's any questions. We're a few weeks out from the final exams for students in New South Wales, also Victoria as well. Exams are fast approaching, so keen to help you out wherever I can. Put your questions in the chat. Otherwise, let's spend some time going through a couple of the student submissions, people who submitted their work using the link underneath the YouTube videos where we have the live streams posted. That's where students are submitting their work to get reviewed, so that I can then provide tips that everyone can use on how you can improve those essays, especially this close to final exams, if you are in that situation where you got the HSC or the final VC exams coming up. So let's have a look at the first submission here. Make sure I'm in the right spot. Okay, cool. Let's see. Hopefully that's clear enough for everyone. So again, brought to you by JeddAI. JeddAI is the AI feedback tool that you can use via jeddl.com. So if you go to the website, you can then get access to our team of experts to get feedback on your essays so that you can maximize your marks for the different sections of the exam. But you can also use the teacher-trained AI tool to give you realistic feedback that relates to your specific rubric. So if you're doing the HSC, you can actually get realistic HSC marking to see how you can improve and where you currently are at, which is always really important. So that's on jeddl.com. Go to JeddAI. And without further ado, let's get through the first one here. So we've got something for the common module. This is on the Merchant of Venice. This was a submission that came through. The question was, explore how text can provide insight into shared human experiences. So straight off the bat, we can see there's really one key word here, which is shared human experiences, because the whole module is on human experiences. So where the question has got specific is in the shared, because it's specified the type of human experience. And the reason why I'm not highlighting human experiences, even though it says shared human experiences, is because whenever you're trying to include a keyword of a question in your response or really respond to it, you want to isolate the singular words versus the whole phrase, because it's much easier to be flexible and add more specific insights around one word, a single word, versus a whole phrase. So if you have to keep saying shared human experiences throughout your essay, it's hard to add more of your own flavor. It's hard to add adjectives before that or expand on it after it if you're constantly having to use those three words all together. So instead of focusing on the shared human experiences part, I'm just going to focus on the shared part. I'm probably still going to say shared experiences, shared this, shared that, but I have more flexibility if I just try and use the shared component, and I don't always feel like I have to write human experiences after. I'll still do that occasionally, but I'm really going to lean into the shared part here. Okay, so the student's intro is here. It was actually a pretty good intro. It just, it has some obvious parts that can be cleaned up pretty easily, but the actual concepts in this I really liked. I just read it before we started. So let's have a look. Paradoxes and inconsistencies between human values and human motivations. See, that was a mouthful, wasn't it? And there were so many keywords, so many buzzwords going on there that I kind of got lost. I don't know about you guys, but I got lost there. Paradoxes and inconsistencies. That's two things. Which one are you talking about? Are they the same? Are you saying them together because they're the same, or are they different? That's the doubling up effect. For anyone who's watched these before, we don't want to double up. We want to use one keyword and expand on that keyword. What type of paradoxes are you talking about? As soon as you group these two together, now we're in trouble, because I don't know exactly what you mean. You're using two words that have a slightly different meaning. So you're conflating the meaning, you're confusing the marker. It's not obvious straight away what you actually mean. Paradoxes and inconsistencies between human values and human motivations. Okay, so maybe there you could have kept the end, but it still just looks like another double up, right? If you're going to say an inconsistency between two things, that makes sense to have the end. But here, that was a little bit confusing. So I would definitely narrow that down to one. And then you say, reveal how prejudice, once internalized, can transform both the oppressed and the privileged. Okay, so you say it can transform. You kind of leave it at that. So it's vague. It's vague, and maybe that's okay. Maybe it's not. We need to look at that because I don't know exactly what you mean by transform. Transform positively, negatively. Excuse me. Illustrating humanity's capacity to perpetuate the very constraints that diminish it. Okay, so I really like that part of the sentence, right? Illustrating humanity's capacity to perpetuate. Perpetuate means to continue. It's a good word for those listening in here. To continue, to allow to continue the very constraints that diminish it. Okay, so there are certain constraints, certain flaws, I suppose, that characterize humanity. And instead of trying to remove those things, we're actually motivated to continue those things. So that's a bit of a paradox. The things that make us less human are actually extended by virtue of us being human, because we're motivated to do things that make us less human, is what's kind of coming across here. Now, whether it's diminish our humanity, suppress our humanity, yeah, that works. Okay, so kind of summarizing this, there's just a little bit too much ambiguity up here for my liking, and also here. So it's a little bit clunky. Let's see if we can tighten that up. Okay, what are we really trying to say, and how can we say it in less words? The best writers are those that can actually convey their point in as fewer words as possible, right? So paradoxes, inconsistencies, human values, human motivations. For any of you out there who kind of list all of those big buzzwords all together, just get rid of it because it just makes it so hard to follow what you're trying to say. Instead, just try and start with the actual point. So you're trying to say that paradoxically, I'll use the paradoxically. Paradoxically, humanity is motivated, or humans are motivated humans are motivated to perpetuate the very, now what do we want to say? The very flaws humanity, no, we'll say humanity. Paradoxically, humanity is motivated. It sounds a bit funny, doesn't it? I'm just trying to piece this together so it's a lot sharper. We'll come back to this bit here. Motivated to perpetuate the very flaws, the very constraints. I'll keep constraints, keep as much as we can here, that diminish it, that suppress it. I like diminish, actually. I'm going for more of a kind of a punchy phrase like this, if you're following. So I've just extracted what's really going on. There's this idea of internalized prejudice. Paradoxically, the internalization of prejudice. Paradoxically, the internalization of prejudice. Humanity's propensity allows humanity the tendency, the proclivity to internalize prejudice. Paradoxically, the proclivity to internalize prejudice allows humanity, now allows doesn't sound quite right, allows humanity to perpetuate the very constraints that diminish it. Paradoxically, the proclivity to internalize prejudice. Now, we could be more specific about what type, but maybe it's not just racial prejudice. Maybe it's not just gender. So I can see why you would want to keep it broad here, which is fine. Paradoxically, the proclivity, which means the inclination to internalize prejudice, to internalize shared prejudice. Notice what I'm doing here. I'm working in a few different variables, but this was about shared human experience, and prejudice is certainly a human experience. Notice how, by not having to say the whole phrase shared human experience, which is why I didn't highlight that whole part, remember? I didn't highlight this whole phrase as a key term because that would have limited my ability to be flexible with the piece. But now, because I'm only really looking at shared, I can actually use shared with the word prejudice straight away. I don't have to say the shared human experience of prejudice, right? You could do that, but it gets clunky. This is still going to tick the box because it's the actual key word of the question. So paradoxically, the proclivity to internalize shared prejudice allows humanity to perpetuate. Now, again, allows almost sounds positive, so I don't like that word. Humanity to perpetuate the very constraints that diminish it. Okay, so because we can internalize prejudice, we actually tend to reduce our own humanity by doing that, which makes sense. Okay, it's a good concept. That's why I said I like this. When I just had that first read a moment ago, I was like, okay, we can do something good here, and we don't have to change too much. We just have to simplify it. How are we simplifying it? All this stuff we don't even need. The internalization is great. Okay, you did have between the oppressed and the oppressor. Paradoxically, the proclivity to internalize shared prejudice between. Yeah, okay, the proclivity to internalize shared prejudice by both the. No, we don't need to bring in the oppressed and oppressor yet. Paradoxically, the proclivity to internalize shared prejudice allows. Now, again, I want something that kind of connotes more of a negative connotation here. So verb choice is always important when you're kind of refining your drafts. So let's see what we can come up with. Threatens. Threatens means it's something bad, right? Now I'm gonna have to rework this a little bit, but the proclivity to internalize shared prejudice, now we could say shared cultural prejudice, because I'm realizing cultural relates to race, sex, everything. Paradoxically, the proclivity to internalize shared cultural prejudices threatens to perpetuate the very constraints that diminish our humanity, that suppress our humanity. Now, this student has done a really good job of using very. You're perpetuating the very constraints that suppress our humanity. That's great language when you're talking about a paradox. So A+ for that. Paradoxically, the proclivity to internalize shared cultural prejudice threatens to perpetuate the very constraints that suppress our humanity. Okay. You could also say our shared humanity. Yeah, so I think it could go either place, but we'll go with internalized shared cultural prejudice. Okay, so that is how we can tidy up that opening statement, if we were drafting this. So hopefully you can clearly see how it's been improved. We've shortened it. We've got rid of the number of clauses. We got rid of the vagueness of transforming the oppressed and the privileged. And we got straight to the key point where you really get the marks, which is about this actual paradox. So I've just kept the part where you actually brought in the paradox, got rid of the confusing addition of inconsistencies, and removed all the other stuff that wasn't as relevant. Now, I like the language of the oppressed and the oppressor. You say the privileged, but I think oppressed and oppressor work better as a combination. So we will try and work that in a subsequent sentence if we can, okay? But that's what we can do with the thesis there to improve it. All right, let me know if this is helpful in the comments, if you have any questions about it. Otherwise, I'm going to continue. So this is the second sentence of the introduction here. Shakespeare's tragic comedy, The Merchant of Venice, interrogates. Now, when you guys are writing your essays on the day, just make sure you underline the title. Make sure you underline the title. If there is a clear date that's accepted for the publication of a text, like for instance, 1603, I'm just don't actually do it here because sometimes it's not clear cut with Shakespeare's ones when the actual publication date was. But if you do have a date, say it was 2016 when it was published, just Google that, then put that in brackets there. Okay, we're not going to do it here, but generally speaking, that's what you should try and do. Okay. For Shakespeare, you also don't need to say William Shakespeare. Shakespeare's earned the right to be introduced, even for the first time, with just his last name. But for anyone else, do the full name when you first introduce them, and then you can just say the last name after it. All right, a little bit of formality there. So Shakespeare's tragicomedy, The Merchant of Venice, interrogates these contradictions. I like, or this contradiction. See, when you say these contradictions, you'd only said one contradiction. Or I guess you're referring to the generic contradictions that you're just saying paradoxes. But again, you'd specified one paradox. So I'm focusing more on the specific versus the general. Okay, I'm going to be specific, not generic. Shakespeare's tragicomedy interrogates these contradictions, interrogates this contradiction. It just sounds so much more specific. And I know you might be thinking, well, what if that doesn't cover all of the ones? Well, of course, there are other ones, but this is your high level one. This one hopefully encapsulates or touches upon something that's relevant to all of your body paragraphs, to your overall argument. So it's specific, but still at the highest level. It's the one that kind of applies to everything. That's why we said cultural prejudice versus racial prejudice, because there might have also been gender. There might have been other types of prejudice. So if you can say something like cultural, that covers everything, which is great. And it's still specific because you say cultural prejudice. So try and look for that kind of wording. Shakespeare's tragicomedy, The Merchant of Venice, interrogates this contradiction through its exploration. Again, a little bit loose there, just the generic exploration. It's not as hard hitting, is it? It's not as argumentative. You could say something instead, you say interrogates through its exploration. It's just again a bit wordy there, right? You could say through this contradiction, right? Through this, and I should do this in the sentence below for clarity. I just think how we started here. You kind of got interrogates through its exploration. I'm not a big fan of like the double up there. Just I think you could get there faster. And then also, you guys are going to know what I'm going to say to this, right? Agency, justice, mercy, and revenge. Oh my goodness, which one is the focus? What are the ideas? You've just got 4 big buzzwords there, and I have no idea where to go with it. So one key word only, expanded upon. That's always the key. You don't want to just list 4 things. As I said, this student had a great start, and then now they're going backwards by making it so vague and having this huge list of meaningless words. No word really means anything unless you accompany it with other words, unless you expand on it, unless you make it specific to something. These are not ideas. These are just words. You can make it an idea by actually saying something about it. Maybe you can explore the relationship between 2 of these things. But don't feel like you have to list off every possible theme that relates to your argument. Just give us the most pertinent argument with specific words, not 4 general terms like this, okay? And again, I'll show you an example of how to do that. But yeah, we need to be careful. You also end up repeating words anyway down here, demonstrating how individuals in seeking agency and escaping prejudice often compromise their own professed virtues. See, there's these flashes of brilliance by the student, compromise their own professed virtues. I like that. That's nice. That flows. So we definitely want to keep that. And this is a really good focus on the contradiction. I really like it. Overall, it's good. It's just got these pieces here that are detracting from the quality, from the sophistication of it, you see? So if you are in a position where any of your drafts have listed off terms like this, then you need to go back, figure out what the one key point is, focus on one of those words, and I can show you how you can actually transform that into one specific insight versus multiple keywords that don't mean anything. Because again, this response, it's like right on the edge of being a great response. So let's put it here. Okay, we're going to improve this. No, I'm not going to use the the Gemini Refine. We're going to do it ourselves because that's what you should be learning how to do, and that's what you're going to have to do on the day of the exam anyway. You're going to have to be flexible and ready to move with this. Okay. You also need to just put in the reps to think through how to improve these so that you can become a clearer thinker and be able to do this yourself. So Shakespeare's tragicomedy interrogates this contradiction. We said we didn't like through its exploration. We didn't like this double up here. By challenging, let's see. So could we say something on the form? We just kind of dismiss it here by saying tragicomedy, right? What about by subverting the comedic genre? A little bit more of a nuanced take on the form because there are tragic elements within this, right? By subverting the comedic genre with elements of tragedy. With flavors of, or with tragic flavor. I mean, no, that sounds a bit silly. By subverting the comedic genre with tragic elements, with elements of tragic, I mean, tragic elements is more concise. Flow does matter, but let's just see if this can work. By subverting the comedic genre with tragic elements, it doesn't quite flow. Notice how I always repeat these things back by saying them out loud. It's exactly what you should be doing when you're looking at your own work. It's amazing how many students will just read their own work in their head and they don't say it out loud again and again. Like I keep saying it because you want to make sure it flows. You want to be able to spot the parts that maybe are grammatically incorrect. There needed to be a comma there. There shouldn't have been a comma there. All of that becomes apparent when you read something out loud as if you're speaking to someone. So say it like a speech again and again and again, 100 times, each sentence, each paragraph, and you will slowly iron out all of the kinks. Hello, Switch. Good to see you. Good to see you, Spoz. All right. By subverting the comedic genre with elements of tragedy. Now, again, see what I've done there? Instead of just saying tragicomedy, notice this. This will be cool for you. This will be helpful. Instead of just saying tragicomedy, it's a tragicomedy, we're actually bringing the reader, the marker's attention to that aspect of form. We're actually putting a bit more emphasis on it as a distinct element that's important, rather than just saying, oh, Shakespeare's tragicomedy, The Merchant of Venice. We're saying by subverting the comedic genre with elements of tragedy, okay? So that's the difference. By subverting the comedic genre with elements of tragedy, then we don't need to say tragicomedy here, obviously. We can just say Shakespeare's play, right? And, you know, if you wanted to, you could actually then work in the context, right? So if we go to like the approximate date of, you know, The Merchant of Venice, you know, late 1500s, so it should be Elizabethan, right? So we can say Elizabethan here, and then you can, so we're replacing tragicomedy with Elizabethan because that places it in the relevant era, right? Okay, so that seems to be when it was composed, time of Queen Elizabeth. Great. Yeah, supposedly written between 1596 and 98. All right, so by subverting the comedic genre with elements of tragedy, Shakespeare's Elizabethan play, The Merchant of Venice, interrogates this contradiction, exposes this contradiction, not this contradiction, the contradiction between, and you're going to go on to say it, right? So, exposes the contradiction, because what? Exploration of agents, none of that was saying anything. Remember, none of that was actually saying anything. Exposes the contradiction, what do you want to say, between the motivations, right? Between the motivations for agency or to escape prejudice, in seeking agency and escaping prejudice. Okay, so really, I'm seeing the contradiction down here. Similar pattern to the first sentence of this student, where they kind of took a while to get to the actual point, and they just need to remove all the middle, which is just confusing and doesn't add any value. Exposes the contradiction, exposes the contradictory. Again, I'm working on the fly here, so bear with me. Exposes the contradictory motivations to maintain or to pursue or to find, to realize to find agency, to escape prejudice, and then while to escape prejudice, the contradictory motivations to escape prejudice while maintaining, while preserving one's own professed virtues. Okay, you've seen the difference. So I'm just going to leave this up here. I've maintained the really good parts there of the response. As I said, there was just a lot that could be taken out, like the red parts here. Just a lot of extra stuff that wasn't needed. But I did like the idea of escaping prejudice and maintaining your virtues. It's hard to do both of those, isn't it? If you try and escape prejudice, sometimes that means that you then become the oppressor. Okay. And that's kind of the argument. Now, maybe we need to get that in at this point, but I just want to show you how you can really sharpen things up. Even though this has seemingly not reduced the length too much, I think it's a little bit shorter, it's actually added a lot more value. So it's a lot sharper in terms of what it's exploring here. It uses a much sharper verb. Exposes is a nice verb for all of you kind of watching. So instead of interrogates isn't bad, interrogates, but exploration was a bit of a throwaway. So we just made it out one verb, not two, exposes the contradictory motivations to escape prejudice while preserving one's own professed virtues. Okay, and we could just make it motivation, so it sounds like a singular. Now it's just that short, sharp idea. Notice how there is no list. Does everyone see how there is no list of themes anymore? There are no themes. There's just an idea, and there's your key idea, and you need to flesh it out. The key idea here is literally the contradictory motivation to escape prejudice while preserving one's own professed virtues. That is all one idea. That's what I'm trying to convey here. If you take away one thing from this video, everything in blue is one idea. Everything up here in red is nothing. They're just words and they aren't fleshed out. See the fleshing out here? It mentions prejudice. It mentions a contradiction. It mentions that there are virtues, but it never just says this theme and this theme. Okay? So that's what you need to avoid there. All right. So for those just joining now, this is the improvement. We're improving the original. We're doing it sentence by sentence. So far we've done the kind of initial sentence of the introduction. We sharpened that up a lot. And now we've sharpened up the second. We've got a couple more to go. Hey, quick intermission. Good to see some positive reviews here. Look at this. Big thanks to your videos. I got rank 1 in English Advanced at my school with your help. Incredible spaz on Switch. That's the best possible feedback we could get, right? So congratulations. That's awesome. Rank 1, spaz on Switch. I mean, you know what I'm going to say. It was like Rosetta the other week. You should come on. You should come and have a chat. Tell us what helped. Would you come on? Let me know in the chat and let's line it up. You can just pop in for 5 minutes or you can hang with me on one of these live streams for a bit longer and we can speak to some Jeddlers out there. So let me know and we'll set that up. All right. But that's awesome. Thank you for that. And anyone who has found value would really appreciate you leaving a review on JeddAI on I think it's on like, even just the Google review, just put in a nice review or review that you're willing to share. Do it on the Google page for JeddAI, and would very much appreciate that. And just spread the word. That's the most important thing. Do we have to worry about varying the sentence length, or can we keep dropping whoppers? I mean, you don't want to, if you're talking about an essay, you don't want to have too much variance. You don't want to have like these super short sentences, then super long ones, and you keep doing that. You might have a really short sentence to start with for a bit of punch, for a bit of effect at the start. But otherwise, generally the sentences should have a similar pattern, similar structure. The shorter the sentence, generally the better, but it still has to pack in everything you want to say. Like here, think about how much we've done. We've introduced the text. That has to take up that many words. We've actually made an insightful comment on the form, which most students don't do at all. Most students don't actually mention something like this in their introduction, let alone elsewhere in their essay. By subverting the comedic genre, which means challenging it. It's not just your standard comedy, The Merchant of Venice. It's actually got tragic elements, but it's also not your standard tragedy, which is why it's a tragicomedy, but we can talk about it in this way. So once we deal with this, which is pretty concise, we introduce the text. All we do after is just give the one key idea fleshed out that further expands upon our initial sentence. The initial sentence was beyond the text. It didn't even mention Merchant of Venice. And you can all do that with your common mod one if you want. You can have a more general human experiences concept. But notice there, I said a more general concept. That doesn't mean it's general. That doesn't mean that it's general in terms of the idea that you're talking about. It's a specific idea that relates to your text, but you're not mentioning the text. We're just saying, paradoxically, the proclivity to internalize shared cultural prejudice threatens to perpetuate the very constraints that suppress our humanity. Bang, we don't mention the text, but clearly it relates to it. Then we introduce the text and extend that idea. We make it more specific to the text, okay? So that's what's going on there. I go to the same school, Hugo. You got a 90 plus rank, didn't watch enough JeddAI. No, apparently not. Hopefully we can bump that up, right? Hugo, so more JeddAI, but also probably more preparation. You need to put in some more work earlier. So right now, you should be refining all your essays, timing them out, cutting them down, doing everything that I've talked about in terms of that preparation process. So you've got time to improve, but you need to get moving now. Don't leave it till a week before. That's not going to give you the jump you need in terms of the marks and the quality. I got 76 predicted on English HSC. Oh, predictions. Forget about predictions. You know what? I'll tell you guys a funny story. Hang on. Yeah, I never looked at predictions and I never liked them. I was always scared to open the envelope. I literally had my principal come in to our common area when I was in year 12, right? This is after trials. We were kind of hanging out, having a week or two to kind of chill before we ramped up the study for the final exams. And I was in the common area. It was like recess or lunch. And the principal's walking around. He's a legend, by the way. Shout out to Middos. But he's walking around handing out these envelopes to everyone. And they are the predictions. The school did these supposedly really accurate predictions to tell me what the ATAR would be and the mark breakdown based on how they went in the trials and the assessments. So you got this guy walking around with envelopes, like with the mystery number inside. And I remember he had mine, or at least he told me he had it and he had the envelope. I'm like, I'm not looking in that envelope, zero chance, because I didn't see how it could be beneficial either way. Either it was going to give me a false sense of complacency because it was a high ATAR, or it was a little bit less than I would have liked, and then it was just going to annoy me and make me scared. So I never looked at it, okay? And now you have looked at it, Hugo, which is fine, and maybe they gave you that. But so many people's predictions were off because you can basically completely change the outcome of your final marks through your HSE performance. Your rank is important in the sense that it's going to shape, half of your mark. You don't know what that mark's going to be, though. If your year does really well, even a rank, you could be 20th, you could be 90th. If the top 90 students on the day of the exam do quite well, you might get an assessment mark in the 80s, and then you can have put in all the work now, got yourself a 90 or above on the day of the exam, and then your final mark is close to a band 6. Maybe it is a band 6. But you can make a radical improvement by your performance. That's why the prediction means nothing. You could literally improve your marks by 20% between now and the HSC just by doing the right things to prepare. So don't be put off by that. If you're doing English Advanced especially, Hugo, you're doing Advanced or Standard. Standard is much harder to get a band 6, but if you're in English Advanced, most of the state get a band 5 or 6. I think it's like 45% or 40% in the band 5. It's like 15% get band 6. These are historic numbers. I'm not sure about like what last year was, but just historically, it's about 50% or close to that get at least 80 in Advanced. Standard is brutal, but if you're in the top 10 or 15% in standard, you can get yourself an 80 or above. Don't be demoralized by me saying that. There's still some students who get band 6. It's just a lower percentage, obviously, because they were the students not doing advanced, so they have to moderate it somehow. But anyway, that's the story on predictions. Just ignore it. And yeah, you're doing advanced, Hugo. So think about it. Like half the state are going to get 80 or above. So you're in good shape already. But you just have to have an average performance for advanced. But I'm not saying to do average. I'm saying if you want to claw some marks back, get up there and get even a band 6, like 15% of the state probably get a band 6, or somewhere between 10 and 15% usually. Then just have a great day on the exam day. Put in the work now, early. Learn those essays, perfect those essays, time them, cut them down, practice lots of different questions. If you do those steps, then yeah, you can easily go up to a band 6 quality. Nothing set in stone. Just prove it to yourself. So I'm going to just work harder than I've ever worked, and then I'll feel amazing about my efforts at the end of the exam period. And whatever you get, you get. But at least you gave yourself every shot. That's what I kind of took away from the HSC. It was like, hey, I gave it everything, and hopefully the marks reflect that. Are we back? Hopefully that's working. Test in. All right, just let me know in the chat if that is working. Perfect. So, yeah, all right. Anna says, hi, Joel. I realized I sometimes mix up individuality with communal connection. For example, during trials, the question was the human need for connection, and I sometimes lean too much on identity. Yeah, okay. Let me see if there was is there an attached question to that, Anna? Like, are you asking how to avoid that? A lot of people do tend to just rely on identity or individuality as their core point. But again, that's a very vague term. Like, what is your identity? What is individuality? I think always linking things to the motivation to be an individual is really important. But you also need to reconcile that with the motivation to belong to a community. So in terms of the human need for connection, you could argue that paradoxically, that need for connection can actually compromise your individuality, if you're following me. Because if you want to belong to a group, you have to give something up of yourself. You have to trade off there, don't you? If you want to belong, you need to kind of be willing to make compromise to fit in. Everyone has to do this to a certain extent. If you want to be completely autonomous and you don't want to live by anyone else's rules or standards or society's rules, then you're either no one's going to hear from you, you're going to be a recluse, or you're going to be locked up because you decided to just play by your own rules and you broke a law and you went to jail. So people have to make that trade-off consciously, subconsciously. We're socialized to do that. But if you get that point about communal connection and you tend to talk a lot about identity or individuality, I would be thinking about the tension that exists there, the tension between being true to yourself and conforming to the community, because people crave communal connection because they want to belong, because that comes from a tribalistic, evolutionary, biological motivation to stay in the tribe, to stay part of the group, to survive. It's a survival instinct and imperative. If you want to survive, you better stay with your group. That, stay with the hunters, the gatherers, stay with everyone and you'll live, right? This is the tribalistic way of looking at it. And if you want to go off on your own, you're probably going to get
eaten by a bear or something. So that would happen, right? So we're like, our DNA is wired to conform, to get along with a group, and we crave that connection as well. Obviously, as humans, you have to crave connection, otherwise you would never pair up with someone, you would never procreate. And again, DNA, evolutionary motivations there to procreate, have children, have a family, be part of the group, survive. All of those things push you towards being willing to negotiate your autonomy and your desire to be free, whatever that is, to desire to be free, with the desire to connect with the community, to belong to a community. So if that's relevant for any of you, it's a good concept to lean on. But you might want to talk about how one's identity is necessarily malleable. It's flexible because it needs to adapt to the value systems of other communities, if you want to coexist, if you want to belong. So there's all of that to explore there. Just make sure if you do talk about identity, though, you're specific. Like, what do you mean? One's racial identity, one's performative identity. Everyone has different identities because, again, we want to fit in. Who's ever found themselves, talking, acting differently, thinking differently when you're around different people? I'm sure you all talk differently to your friends than you do to your family. Different environments, different identities, different performative roles that you're putting on. So consider that, right? Everyone's got a range of identities, and you could argue that a lot of that malleability, a lot of that flexibility in one's identity will come from the desire to connect with others. Doesn't only come from that, but that's a big one. Obviously, your sense of self will come from your culture, your familial influences, and whatnot. But that's how you could talk about it in relation to communal connection. Anyway, bit of a rant on that, just picking up on the comment. Wasn't sure what the actual question was, but I assume you wanted some advice on how to deal with that. Don't get stuck in the trap of just talking about identity by itself. You need to talk about attention. Why is identity interesting? It's interesting because people often have to compromise their identity to fit in. English seems a lot more effort for less mark improvement. That's a funny observation. At the top end, that's for sure. For those who are here, who are trying to go from a 90, a low 90s to a high 90s, you're going to be doing a crazy amount of hours of extra work to get that extra mark or two. And that's how it is. That's how it is at the top, right? There is a disproportionate amount of work that's needed to hit that top percentile. And that's how it should be, right? It's like you can do very well if you have a certain level of intelligence and you've done a certain amount of work, right? Now you could have less intelligence and put in more work and you'll get to that very good level. But if you want to get to the top of the top, you have to basically be willing to trade off weeks of extra work, hours and hours at least of extra work, just to give yourself a shot at an extra mark or two in the 90s. That's just how it works for English. So it's true observation, but if you can get a band 6 in English, it is going to be very helpful for your ATAR, right? It's a great contributor, and it has to count for everyone. So you've got to remember that. It's definitely going to count. If you're doing 12 units, it's still going to count. And a 90, 95, and 95 in English is like a 99.95 ATAR equivalent. So if you can get close to the mid-90s, you're laughing. But you'll have to do a disproportionate amount of work to boost yourself from a 90 to a 95, or from a 95 to a 98. And then it's never guaranteed, when you go that high. All right, cool. So let's go back to our working essay. Let's go back to the stage, as they call it here. That's not the view you want. Okay. So shall we continue? Third sentence of this student's introduction, and I will bring the question back down. That was the question. By portraying Shylock, the syntax here is a little bit off. By portraying Shylock, whose marginalization fuels both his desire for justice and his enactment of vengeance, alongside Portia, who suffers patriarchal confinement, yet weaponizes the law against others. Like, again, this is actually, these parts are beautiful here. like they're spot on. You're really capturing the tension for each one. Shylock is marginalized, and that makes him desire both justice and revenge. And Portia is marginalized, due to being a woman, having these patriarchal limitations, kind of imposed upon her. And yet she also manipulates the law against others. So, hang on, is this in the way? Let's pull this up. There we go. Yeah, it is clunky. It is clunky, but guys, let's analyze this together. It's clunky, but it's doing a lot of good as well. I just kind of, took pause here at this initial comma. By portraying Shylock, whose marginalization, I can see exactly why they've structured it this way, because they wanted to get these nice expanded clauses in. We're just going to see if we can do that in a better way. But I really like what's coming out of those parts there. The text interrogates the human propensity to sustain oppressive systems. Interrogate. See, you would have used interrogates twice anyway. I got rid of it earlier. The text interrogates the human propensity. Now you got propensity. I did actually sub that word in earlier. So you could say the human tendency or the human motivation. I guess it might not be a motivation to sustain it, but it's kind of a, oh no, we said maybe proclivity earlier. Look at this, we're getting a bit too fancy here. Proclivity, what did we actually say? Yeah, proclivity, and that one's propensity. Propensity is like a good economics term as well. Marginal propensity to save, shout out to Echo students. All right, let's continue. So we understand here there's a propensity to sustain these oppressive systems. I really like the concept of this sentence, so much better than the other ones, because it never has that area where it's listing the different keywords or buzzwords, right? Remember before how it was just like agency, prejudice, all of these things that weren't making a specific point. So why, instead of this comma though, how can we just neaten this up a bit? Sometimes you just got to play around with the syntax to make it work, okay? So what we can do is say by, do we want to say by juxtaposing? I guess we want to say by coupling, by pairing. By coupling Shylock's marginalization. Let's just see what we can do here. Or by placing, representing something. Shylock's marginalization. I wonder if this will be any better. I might make the same mistake. By characterizing, no. Let's go by portraying, to keep it as much the same as possible. By portraying Shylock's marginalization, which fuels both his desire for justice, I'm going to use paradoxically again, because if that was the key focus, I know it's not in this question, it was about shared experiences. Actually, yeah, it wasn't in there. So if it was, I would put it in there, but that's fine. Which fuels both his desire. See how this says desire? I would always prioritize generally the rubric terms if you can. So the markers look for those rubric terms. So if you can say motivation instead of desire, that's typically going to be better. I know we said that up here, contradictory motivation, but they are generally the better words to select than a word like desire. If it gets super repetitive, that's an exception, but I like to prioritize the rubric terms where possible. Certainly prioritize the keywords of the question, the key term of the question shared. I would be happy to repeat that multiple times in the sentence, because it's going to show the marker that you're answering the question explicitly. By portraying Shylock's marginalization, which fuels both his motivation for justice and revenge. See, it does, but okay, I see enactment, because you wanted to do behavior. Okay, let's see, which fuels both his motivation for justice and his enactment of revenge. Yeah, okay, I do like that, because it's like the behavior and motivation piece. Alongside Portia. Alongside alongside the patriarchal oppression of Portia, which ironically drives her. I'm not even sure this is going to sound any better, to be honest. It was a pretty good sentence after reading it. It was just that top bit that needed a rephrase. Okay, what I'm doing here is showing you an example of just experimenting with different sentence structures and just playing around with it to see what flows the best. But this one was already pretty good. By portraying Shylock's marginalization, which fuels both his motivation for justice and his enactment, of vengeance, maybe revenge, which fuels both his motivation for justice and enactment of revenge, alongside the patriarchal oppression of Portia, which ironically drives her. Who ironically weaponizes the law against others. The text interrogates the human propensity to sustain. Yeah, okay. The question is like, why are we sustaining these oppressive systems? Like, what's going on here? It hasn't really connected it yet. Shylock is motivated for both of those things. Portia's motivated because these people are living in a society that doesn't accept, human difference. Basically, it doesn't have that sense of equality. And if you live in a society, or you have a society that's motivated by power or motivated by money, right? There's these misguided pursuits, then that leads to a society that becomes disenfranchised, dislocated, right? So I think you could probably add a little bit more color or detail on that. The text interrogates the human propensity to sustain oppressive systems predicated on, let's see what you guys prefer, predicated on power rather than, inclusion or contentment or something like that. Let's see what we think. Rather than equality. Or rather than compassion. I guess it's compassion in this text as well. So I'm just adding a little bit of extra detail there. I know it has extended the sentence, made it a little bit longer, but because I felt like this was a little bit repetitive and vague. So even that was a little bit vague. Even though it was sharp, I thought maybe we can just add a little bit more of a connector there. Kind of ties it together. Okay, so again, optional. I like the original as well. It was just that top bit that I would probably change either way, but there you go. All right, we'll do this last bit. The last sentence, again, kind of lets it down. There were such good ideas in this introduction, but I mean, you know what I'm going to say. Anomalies, this is just straight from the rubric. Every single key term jammed in there like sardines, and define human behavior and shape collect. It's like every phrase from the rubric's now featuring. You don't get to make any good points if you jam everything in there. None of that means anything to anyone, I guarantee you. So it's a throwaway sentence. You're literally better off just ending the introduction here at a really strong point rather than adding this bit that doesn't add anything. It actually just confuses once again. You need to bring it back to the question in that last sentence. And I like to focus on what the impact on the responder is. See how you haven't dealt with the audience yet? So I would probably say something like, in doing so, Shakespeare challenges the audience. Again, challenges the audience. I encourage you all to take that kind of lens or deploy that lens for your final sentence of the introduction to vary what you're saying, to take a different angle. Okay, you've said these ideas, you've said how it's represented in the text. What's the impact on the reader? What's the impact on the audience? And connect that to the question. What's the takeaway, right? What are we being challenged to do? In doing so, Shakespeare challenges the audience to prioritize, to privilege shared experiences or harmonic, shared experiences of harmony. Challenges the audience to privilege shared experiences of harmony over divisive experiences. Divisive, people dividing up. Divisive experiences of hate. I'm just trying to like make that flow there. In doing so, Shakespeare challenges the audience to prioritize. Shakespeare challenges the audience to privilege shared experiences of harmony over divisive experiences of hate. So it has a bit of flow there. I don't mind that. It has the shared experiences thing, which is the the key part of the question. I was doing the words of the question in green. We mix those colors up. So we'll use that. Oh, no, that looks like something you don't want. What do we like here? We'll just go blue. Challenges the audience to privilege shared experiences of harmony. Notice the elaboration here. What will I do it? Running out of colors. Of harmony over divisive experiences of hate. So then we get the expansion. Notice, look at the expansions here. We don't just say experiences. We say divisive experiences of hate. Okay, experiences, that's where we're hitting the question. Shared experiences, and we're focused on the audience and challenging the audience in some way. So that's a really good go-to structure to improve the end of your introductions, whether it's for the common module or otherwise. But hopefully that helps. Again, showing you how you can improve all of these different parts. There were the final two sentences if you wanted to relook at those. Again, this one was pretty good. The student did a really good job at this sentence, where they kind of brought in more specifics on what were the main, not just the main characters. You don't have to, don't make characters your main focus in an essay. But if there are, like in this case, Shylock, Portia, if they're the main characters that represent the ideas, then you might want to mention them in the introduction for the purpose of expanding upon your key concepts, your key arguments that are going to be in your body paragraphs. So that is how you can improve those two. And then again, these were the first two. Let me get rid of that thing so you can see all of it. There it is. All right, a few questions before we wrap up. I've got some other ones that I'll try and go through later, but that's a pretty good rundown of introductions. I really want to focus on those introductions in the next few streams, and going through actual practice questions, how you can approach different types of essay questions, because that's what you need to be practicing a lot of. How can you make those introductions more relevant to the question that you get given, and how can you tighten them up? All right, make sure to check out JeddAI.com if you need help with any resources of this kind. Like if you want to see the merchant resources, Crucible, 1984, any of that, go to JeddAI.com. Get the study guides. They have all the broken down examples and analysis to help you, kind of improve the sophistication of your responses there. So definitely go for it on JeddAI.com. And you also got JeddAI as well if you want feedback on your essays, like full feedback from the team. Otherwise, if you want to submit your responses like this and get feedback, get breakdowns, use the link below the live stream videos on YouTube. Which module should have the longest intro? Well, they should all be a similar length, to be honest. I mean, every essay is 20 marks. They've all got an intro, 3 or 4 bodies, mainly 3 bodies, and a conclusion. I would say the one that would probably tend to be the longest, because you've got to introduce 2 texts, is the comparative. So textual conversations for Module A. That would tend to be the longer one, purely because you've got to introduce 2 texts and you've got to refer to both of their contexts. But you should compress that a little bit, or as much as possible. So I would say, for me, textual conversations would be longer just because of the formalities, but there's nothing special about it other than that. Like, there's no reason to add more sentences. It's just that you have to introduce 2 whole texts and talk about the textual conversation between them. But yeah, that one might be slightly longer, but try not to make any of your intros longer than, 150-ish words. If you're a slower writer, it might be more like 130, 120, 130. But certainly, that 130 to 150 range is what I would tend to target. Let's see what this is as an example. Let's see what we've rewritten it as. typically 4 sentences is solid. I like the 4-sentence one. Sometimes I used to do 5, but it would, if you can do the 4 more concisely, I actually probably prefer that structure. That's only 110. That was only 110. Okay, that was 110 words. Awesome if you can do it. What I would question is, did we get enough there of context, form? Do we do all of that? I was only working with what the student submitted. It turns out there actually isn't that much on context. The only mention of context was Elizabethan. Here, that's it. So it doesn't touch on any of the tensions that arise from, traditional medieval values, the Renaissance, how the Renaissance was focused on individualism, and how there was a value clash going on culturally. So if we add in that link to context, which definitely should be there, you should all have a very clear kind of connection to the key contextual influences in your introductions. All of them should have that. If we were to add that in here, that might add 15, 20 words. It doesn't need to be a whole separate sentence, but you can work it in, allowing about 20 or so words there. Then we're at 130, 135, which feels about right. Okay. Airstriker, you are doing merchant. Well, what a good start for you. This is an example of what you're building towards in terms of your intros. Don't be stressed. You haven't even started. First of all, make sure you get your JeddAI resources for merchant. Start reading up on that as you read through the text. You can start building like a scaffold for an essay. The scaffolds are on there as well. And as you study it, just try to build your tables of analysis and understand what your 3 key points are going to be for the beginning, middle, and end of the text in terms of what's the problem, what's the consequence of that problem, and what's the resolution if there is one. And if you kind of follow that structure and framework and you place all the ideas and analysis within that framework, then you'll start to see an essay unfold. Okay, but at these early stages, read up on lots of summaries. I would always look at summaries of things like The Merchant of Venice, read a translated copy, like the No Fear Shakespeare, look at the actual text as well. But make sure before you do it, you look at summaries and maybe there's like a short video representation of what happens. It's really important you understand what actually happens throughout the course of the text. Like, just understand the plot element first before you do anything else. Then you can look at the actual copy of the text. You don't want to get confused. You need to know roughly what's going to go on in that text. And then you can think about the context, or really you can consider context and form before that as well. But yeah, do some preliminary research, know the basics, especially of the plot, then look at the actual text, and then start, as you read the text, flag in, important quotes and scenes. And the better you know the overarching themes in advance, the more you'll be able to hone in straight away on the important quotes. All right, let's hide this thing. In trials, I found that I finished most of my essays in 35 minutes. If I'm in this situation again, what can I do to make my essay better in 5 minutes? Okay, so you finished them in 35 minutes each. I mean, you had 5 minutes to spare for each one, even after adapting to the question. Well, I can't remember. Did you tell me how you went with your trials? I'm trying to remember if you posted yours. I mean, you're asking, what can I do to try and make them better? Well, how did you go? I don't know. Maybe you can't make them better. Maybe 35 minutes is perfect. I'm happy with that time. Did you get 20 out of 20? Like, I can't really advise you unless I know where you're coming from. You did get 20 out of 20. I got, no, I didn't. Yeah. Maybe yeah was agreeing with me. What marks did you get? I got, no, I didn't. Yeah. Haha, nah. All right, I'm confused. Just put the marks in there. Don't shy away from the marks. Here we go. Thank you. 18 for common. That's a great mark. 18 out of 20 solid. So there wasn't much more you needed to do for that. And I would need to see your feedback as well. Was it that you didn't answer the question well enough, or were there some missing pieces? Did they say, oh, you needed more context, you needed more form, you needed to deepen your analysis? If you got those kind of comments, you need to address your draft. If you got comments relating to how well you answered the question, then you need to do more practice on adaptation and looking at different questions. And you don't really need to change as much of the draft. Okay. That's for the 18 out of 20. For the 14 and 14, if you've got 5 minutes to spare on each, even after adapting, you probably need to add in more depth with your analysis would be the first thing. But again, hopefully you've got comments that were given back to you telling you why you got a 14. But I would imagine, given you had 5 minutes to spare, as I said, you need more depth. Your introduction might need to be a bit longer. So prepare a slightly longer one, 130 to 150 words that has more sophistication in it. Okay, try and have more sophisticated analysis of evidence. Try and have more context and more form. Context and form. Is it in every paragraph? Have you mentioned a specific contextual influence, a specific aspect of form, style, genre, like the fact that there are soliloquies? What's the effect of that? The fact there are stage directions, those kind of things. Have you mentioned them once per paragraph? Have you connected something to a new contextual influence that was important at the time? And have you provided enough depth when you're explaining the meaning of your quotes and techniques? Yeah, it's a shame when they are vague, but contextual analysis, broader and more precise. It's like a paradox in itself, isn't it? Be broader, but more precise. That is a strange comment, right? Is it broader and more precise contextual analysis? You do need to be specific when you mention context. So, you don't want to just say Elizabethan era. You need to say the values of the era. Okay. So you need to say the patriarchal values of the Elizabethan era. You need to always say something specific, a specific value. The kind of movement towards individualism during the Renaissance. It's like specific phrases like that are going to enhance the quality of your response by quite a lot. So look for those points where you refer, maybe some people have mentioned the Cold War or post-World War II. That's not enough. You need to attribute a value to that. You need to ascribe a specific value to it, right? Why is that important that it was Cold War? Well, you might say reflecting the existential anxieties of the collective during the post-war period. Okay, you've told me that there were collective existential anxieties. People were worried about their existence after World War II because there was the dropping of the bomb. That's a very specific feeling that you've captured about the era versus just saying during post-World War II era. That doesn't say anything about it. So you need to be more specific in that way, and you need to do it more often. You need to do it at least once per paragraph, including in your introduction. How many quotes from your own piece and the text you're inspired by should I include in either 5, 8, or 10 mark reflections? So generally for an 8 or 10 mark reflection, I would treat them the same, 2 body paragraphs. I'd have 1 to 2 quotes from your own piece and 1 to 2 quotes from the prescribed text per paragraph. So 1 to 2, I aim for 2 quotes from your own piece and then have 1 to 2 quotes from your prescribed text to go with each of those. And maybe you can break up those quotes and put them both in one sentence, or merge in one of the quotes from a prescribed text in with the same sentence that you're quoting your own piece to show a comparison. So they don't all need to be separate sentences, because I think you'd struggle for time if you tried to do 4 sentences with 2 quotes from yours, 2 quotes from the prescribed, and then do that all again. That's really hard, and not expected for an 8 to 10. So 1 to 2 for each of those, and try and merge a couple of those where you can. Okay. For a 5 marker, it's more of a 1 paragraph response versus having the mini essay with the short introduction, 2 bodies, one sentence conclusion. That is what I would do for an 8 to 10 mark reflection. But for a 5 mark reflection, I would do 1 paragraph, and I would have just be like one of those paragraphs from the 8 or 10 marker, where you'd have ideally 2 quotes from your own piece that back up the stylistic element, and also have maybe another more micro feature or technique there. And then you'd have up to 2 quotes or pieces of examples of how the prescribed text used it. Okay. So 2 and 2 is the ideal, but they don't all need to be separate sentences, is the takeaway. All right, guys, we're going to finish up there. So I hope that helps. I'll jump on soon as I can. As I said, I will try and ramp these up, do kind of longer ones as we get closer to the HSE. But don't leave it too late. You all need to start ramping it up right now, polishing your drafts, timing out your essays, cutting them down, looking at different questions, familiarizing yourself with those drafts so that you're in the best position. Because when it gets to 1 to 2 weeks out, that's when you need to be locking all that material in. You don't have to memorize it all word for word, but you need to be familiarizing yourself with it very well so that when you get in there on the day, all the work's done. All you have to do is respond to yet another practice question. Treat the actual HSE question like yet another practice question. Oh, I've done this. I know how to adapt it. Bang, bang, bang. I've already timed it out. I'm definitely not going to run out of time because I've factored in everything. I drafted something that was really sophisticated. I got feedback. I timed it. I cut it down. It was 32 minutes. I know I can do this in 40 minutes. I know how to respond to that type of question because I've done multiple practice questions. That's literally the spot you need to be in by the time you get into the exam. So you need to do everything now to get into that spot where the exam questions literally feel like doing just another practice question. You've got everything ready to go. You're just adapting as you go through, and all the materials there. You've got the sophistication, and it'll be a breeze, right? It'll be a breeze if you do a lot of heavy lifting now. Otherwise, it'll be a very stressful exam. It'll be stressful probably either way, even if you're super prepared. High stakes, but put yourself in the best spot. All right. Let me know what else you guys want help with. Otherwise, I will come back. I'll review some more of the submissions that have come through on the live stream link. So the link below the live stream videos on YouTube, that's where you can submit a paragraph. Just do a short paragraph. Show me a thesis statement for a new question. Guys, submit questions that you think you don't know how to adapt an essay to. I don't know how to respond to that particular question. Just do that and give me a couple of lines of like a thesis statement that you think could work, and we'll go through that. I will prioritize those shorter ones that are basically like thesis statements to a new question, because that's what people really need to focus on when it comes to the exam. All right. Great to see y'all, and we'll see you soon.